Imagine being married for almost 35 years, thinking you've built a solid life together, kids, dogs, a house with the white picket fence. It hasn't always been perfect, but you stayed together, adapting and compromising through thick and thin. You even stepped way out of your comfort zone to make things work, trying things you never thought you would, all to keep the spark alive. And then, 6 years ago, intimacy between you and your husband faded completely. You put it down to medications and health issues, hoping things would eventually return to normal. Your husband, meanwhile, became very close with a male friend who was battling cancer. He'd drop everything to help him, even canceling plans with you, and you accepted it. The friendship seemed deep, but since there were no signs of anything romantic, you didn't feel threatened. You figured once his friend passed, your husband would return to being more present with you. But after spending a few days dog-sitting for your sister, you came home to find a typed, anonymous letter in the mail. It described your husband's affair with another woman, someone you knew. There was even a picture. Completely devastated, you began obsessively searching for evidence, tracking their calls, and driving by her house. You'd worked so hard to lose weight, over 130 pounds, to regain health and confidence, yet he showed no appreciation. Instead, when you dressed up, he insulted you, saying you looked like a whore. Now, you're at a crossroads, wondering what this woman has that you don't. And after nearly 35 years together, you're left questioning everything you thought you knew about your marriage. After receiving that letter, everything changed. For days, you couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about your husband's betrayal. The shock was overwhelming. You'd shared a life, kids, and decades of memories, and here he was, devoting his time and affection to someone else. You became determined to get to the bottom of it, so you started searching. Every day, you checked his call logs and went through every corner of your house, his office, nightstand, anywhere he might have hidden evidence. The logs revealed the truth. He called her constantly, 6 to 7 times a day, each conversation lasting at least 20 minutes. Finally, after 3 days of digging, you reached a breaking point. You couldn't take his indifference any longer. He acted as if nothing was wrong, as if this secret life he was leading didn't even exist. You decided to confront the woman directly, to hear from her exactly what was going on. You drove to her house, heart pounding, and pounded on her door, shouting for her to come out and face you. For 10 long minutes, you rang the bell and called her out, but she never answered. She did, however, capture it all on her security camera, and soon enough, your husband had seen the footage. That night, he was furious, not with himself, but with you. He berated you for embarrassing him, calling your actions stupid and out of line. When you asked if he'd end things with her, he coldly said no, insisting she was a good friend and that you should even apologize to her for making a scene. You couldn't believe his nerve. He didn't deny anything, didn't try to console you, and instead treated you as though you were the problem. At that moment, it was clear, he wasn't planning on ending his affair, and he had zero remorse. You felt crushed, but you knew you couldn't continue like this. You spent the next few days at your sister's, trying to piece together a plan. On what should have been your 35th wedding anniversary, you reached out to a divorce attorney. Even though their office was closed, you completed all the initial forms online, preparing yourself for a future without him. In the weeks that followed, you began to build a new life. For the first time in decades, you dusted off your resume and applied for jobs. After spending years as a housewife, you worried about what kind of work you'd even be able to get. But soon, you landed not one but 2 jobs that you could work back to back. You opened a secret bank account and started putting aside every extra penny, all in preparation for leaving. You knew that, given his attitude, he'd try to make things as difficult as possible once you filed, so you had to be ready. Your husband, sensing a shift, tried to exert control. He threatened to take your phone away, claiming he'd had enough of your nonsense. So, you got a backup phone, just in case. When he realized his threats weren't breaking you down, he shifted to being strangely nice. He offered to fix your car, bought supplies for your job, and even helped with work-related expenses. There were times when his kindness made you second-guess your plan. But then, just as quickly, he'd switch back to insults and criticism, tearing down your confidence and reminding you exactly why you were leaving. By this point, you were hiding your plans, not letting him see how his actions affected you. The calmness frustrated him, but you weren't going to give him any satisfaction. Then, last month, things reached a new low. Your son had lent him his car, and without telling your husband, he'd placed a tracking device in it. Through the tracker, you confirmed what you'd suspected. He was lying to you, going straight to her house even while insisting he was somewhere else. Every time you questioned him, he'd lie to your face, spinning one excuse after another. On Father's Day, after working an overnight shift, you'd spent the morning preparing a special dinner, only for him to leave for her house instead. He later claimed he'd gone to Walmart and then to a friend's for tacos, but the tracker didn't lie. Furious, you called her, leaving a voicemail saying you were done, that she could have him. 10 minutes later, he burst into the house with his usual excuses, saying she felt threatened and might lose clients if people knew. It was all about her, again. Not one word about how he'd hurt you or betrayed your trust. You tried to move forward, but the hits kept coming. A week later, you needed a ride after a melanoma removal, which happened to be on the anniversary of losing your sister to the same disease. When he picked you up, he didn't ask how you were or offer any comfort. All he said was, "I'm hungry." Every time he ignored or insulted you, your resolve grew stronger. Yet, he continued, acting as though nothing was wrong, even abandoning your son's birthday celebration early to run to her house. The final straw came when he pretended to be helping a stranded couple but, once again, went straight to her. You texted him, calling him out, but he ignored you. Later, he stormed in, screaming, calling you every name in the book. He even made you feel physically unsafe, and for the first time, you wondered if he'd hit you if he was angry enough. The neighbors likely heard everything, but you didn't care. That was it. The next morning, you met with your lawyer, who suggested waiting a few more months to file. Since your husband's income was complicated, waiting could mean a more favorable alimony. You'd lasted this long, so you decided you could make it until September. In the meantime, you'd continue gathering evidence and saving money. The days following that explosive argument were tense, to say the least. He kept to himself, but you could feel the resentment building every time he looked at you. His focus seemed to be solely on maintaining his affair while keeping you in the dark, or so he thought. While he went about his double life, you quietly gathered every bit of evidence you could, documenting his lies and his whereabouts. Each time he claimed to be going somewhere harmless, you watched him drive straight to her house. It hurt, but it also steeled your resolve. One of the hardest things was telling your children. After so many years of hiding the cracks in your marriage, you hated having to reveal the truth. But with everything happening, you felt they deserved to know. You called each one, trying to keep your emotions in check. It was heart-wrenching to hear their reactions, anger, disbelief, and even sadness as they learned the reality of what you were going through. Your eldest was furious, ready to confront his father directly and even the other woman. Another son quietly listened, absorbing the news in his own thoughtful way, while your youngest was blunt, saying he'd expected it given how he'd witnessed your husband treating you. The conversations were draining but liberating, too. For the first time, you felt a sense of support. They didn't blame you, and each one urged you to do what was best for you, encouraging you to leave and rebuild your life. Your children's words gave you the strength to keep moving forward. A few days later, on what should have been a calm evening, he came home complaining about his rough day but barely acknowledged you. You knew where he'd been, thanks to the tracker, and finally, you couldn't hold back. You confronted him about his constant lies, asking him why he couldn't at least be honest if he wanted to spend his time with her. His reaction was instant and ugly. He exploded, calling you names, insulting you, and blaming you for everything. It was as if he was outraged that you had the nerve to question him after everything he'd done. He continued screaming, his words sharp and cruel, reducing your years of loyalty and sacrifices to nothing. You stood your ground, refusing to let him see how deeply he'd wounded you. Eventually, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, leaving you standing there, stunned and shaken. After he left, you realized you couldn't live like this any longer. You reached out to your lawyer, and together, you created a solid plan to get through the next few months. The lawyer advised you to stay strong and document everything to ensure you'd have a strong case when the time came. You focused on your goals, staying financially stable, working your 2 jobs, and keeping your savings hidden. You knew that when the time came, you'd need every resource you had to make a clean break. In the following weeks, you began to notice how his behavior shifted. He seemed to realize that his outbursts no longer affected you as much. When his anger didn't intimidate you, he started trying to play nice again, offering help with small things, buying you supplies for work, and even fixing your car. But it was all too little, too late. You saw through his attempts at manipulation and recognized them for what they were, nothing more than tactics to keep you dependent. But the small acts of kindness had another effect. Instead of making you reconsider, they reminded you of what was missing in your marriage: genuine love, respect, and partnership. Any warm feelings were quickly erased each time he turned around and went back to her. Despite his attempts to make you doubt yourself, you grew more certain with each passing day that leaving was the only option. By the end of June, the stress had taken its toll on both of you. He became increasingly paranoid, accusing you of snooping and even threatening to take away your phone. But instead of fighting back, you calmly let him think whatever he wanted. You'd already purchased a backup phone and hidden it safely. Letting him believe he was still in control kept him off your trail while you prepared for your exit. Every day, you saved more, built up your confidence, and pictured the day you'd be free. The final straw came one evening when he claimed he was helping a stranded couple nearby but instead headed straight to her house. After yet another lie, you decided to stop waiting. You'd made it this far, but it was time to be done with this exhausting cycle. You sent him a text, laying everything out plainly, saying you knew he was with her and that you were done with the lies. He came home furious, screaming insults and lashing out, calling you names no one should ever hear from their spouse. The neighbors likely heard every word, but you didn't care anymore. That night, you quietly resolved that the countdown to your freedom had truly begun. September couldn't come soon enough, and you knew exactly what you needed to do. You were done with the disrespect, the lies, and the constant attempts to control you. You were no longer the same person who'd once felt trapped and defeated. Now, you were stronger and ready to rebuild your life on your own terms. The months passed slowly, but your focus kept you going. You worked hard, saved every bit you could, and quietly built your own path to freedom. Your lawyer gathered evidence, and you prepared for the divorce process. Every time your husband tried to manipulate or intimidate you, it only strengthened your resolve. You knew that once you filed, the situation might escalate, but you were prepared. As September finally arrived, you felt an odd sense of calm. The weeks of quiet planning, the hidden savings, and the support from your children all helped you feel ready. You filed the paperwork, knowing it was the beginning of a new chapter, a life where you could finally prioritize your own happiness and peace. On the day you served him, he reacted exactly as you'd expected: rage, denial, and more attempts to shift blame. But this time, you didn't flinch. You'd made it through his worst behavior and had nothing left to lose. With the support of your family and a newfound inner strength, you felt ready to leave behind the pain and focus on a future without him. In the months that followed, you focused on healing and rebuilding. Your children stood by you, and gradually, you started to rediscover who you were outside of the marriage. The weight of the betrayal began to lift, replaced by a growing sense of peace and freedom. You knew it would take time, but step by step, you were reclaiming your life. If you're facing betrayal or an unfaithful partner, remember that rebuilding is possible. Trust yourself to prioritize your well-being, gather support, and seek the resources you need to move forward. If this story resonates, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more content like this. Thank you for joining us today.